This is a 3D printed HO scale water tower, and it's my first attempt at scale modeling, and it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. So I'm going to show you the steps that I took to build this model. I started out by searching Thingiverse for HO scale models, and I found this water tower design by user Kabrumble that I really liked. It seemed well designed, interesting, and complex without being difficult to print. The instructions said it didn't need anything special like supports or rafts, and so I downloaded all the files, loaded them into Slicer, and followed the directions to keep with 20% infill for the larger items and 100% infill for the smaller items like the ladders and the deck. Once the designs were sliced, I loaded them onto an SD card and put them into the Prusa Mk2s. I printed the water tower using white Hatchbox PLA filament, and fortunately everything printed successfully on the very first attempt, so this is a very well designed model, especially considering that there was a lot of bridging and a lot of kind of complex areas that didn't include any supports. There was a lot of stringing on the prints, and a few areas came out a bit funky because of the lack of supports, but overall it was a really quick, really easy print. To clean up the prints, I used a lighter, a deburring tool, and 400 grit extra fine sandpaper. Whenever I have prints that have a lot of stringing like this, I like to take a lighter and just quickly pass the flame over the strings. It usually works pretty well. It is very important to make sure that the flame doesn't stay on the prints for too long because PLA can start to melt pretty quickly, and you can make the mistake I did and end up destroying your print pretty easily. Fortunately, because these are 3D printed, I was able to just print another part, and about 25 minutes later, everything was good as new. I then decided to skip the flame and clean up this piece using just the sharp blade. The deburring tool is really helpful to just sort of smooth out parts of the prints and get rid of any burrs that need to be deburred. And finally, some extra fine sandpaper always helps to smooth out the prints and really improve their overall appearance. It's also an easy way to get rid of layer lines like this that could end up ruining the appearance of a print. Once all the pieces were cleaned up and looked good, I gave them a rinse under the faucet and let them dry. I spray painted the pieces with a gray primer using a cardboard box as a makeshift spray booth, and once all of the pieces were primed, I left them to dry outside for about 20 minutes. Back inside, it was finally time to fire up the airbrush, and I've recently gotten into airbrushing, so I was really excited to be able to incorporate it into this project. I'm using a dual action airbrush, which just basically means that the trigger has two functions. You press the trigger down to begin the airflow and then pull it back to begin the flow of paint. So this gives you a bit more control over the flow of paint, which is really helpful when painting small pieces like these. I did a bit of research online, which basically means I just went to Google Images and looked at water towers to try and help figure out which colors to use, and I finally decided to use a combination of red and white. So I started out by loading the airbrush with red paint, knowing that the gray primer would end up dulling the color and give it a bit more of a weathered look. This ended up working really well, and I ended up liking the effect quite a bit. To give the appearance of rust and age, I mixed in some brown paint with the red paint and put that on areas of the tower that might see a little more stress and weather than others. And the end result came out really nice. It actually looks a lot like the color of the Golden Gate Bridge. And again, with this model, any imperfections actually just help improve the overall effect. To paint the main portion of the tank, I used a bit of painter's tape to mask it off so that way the bottom could have the red color, and I decided to paint the tank itself white, knowing that maybe some point in the future it'd be kind of cool to add like a city name or a logo on the tank itself. It did take a few layers of white to cover up the primer all the way, and felt a little bit futile to do all that work just to get it back to its original color, but I guess that's part of the process. Once I was happy with how everything was painted, it was time to finally assemble the tower. I started out by placing the decking around the bottom of the tank, which was actually pretty easy to just snap into place. It was a really snug, firm fit. I didn't need to use any kind of glue or adhesive. I did have a little bit of trouble attaching the tank to the tower itself. I think I was just being impatient with the super glue, and I'm sure somebody with more scale modeling experience would have had a much easier time than me. So once I convinced myself to just be a little more patient, everything came together just fine. Then it was time to attach the final details like the ladders and the top of the water tank. And honestly, I was surprised at how good this water tower looked. It's a great model, it was super fun to paint. I did have to retouch some areas that I messed up as I was assembling the model, but that was a pretty easy task. I think this would make a fantastic addition to an HO scale scene, or if you're new to the hobby like me, it's also a great first dive into the world of scale modeling. And I do want to take a moment and give credit to Luke Towan, who has an incredible scale modeling channel that I've been watching for a long time. His tutorials and videos were the motivating factor for me to try this out for myself. So I hope this was a helpful and interesting and possibly even entertaining look into my journey into the world of scale modeling. I'd love to do more projects like this in the future and share with you what I learn along the way.